Beatrice, are you hiding something from us? This place is insanely expensive. My friends said in amazement, flipping through pictures on Instagram of my face from different angles. There must be some mistake, it's not me. But there was no point in denying it. I had a very distinctive mole on the bridge of my nose. Don't try to fool us, Beatrice. The thing I feared the most has happened. I was at a dead end, and I needed to find a way out of it. But how could I explain myself to my friends and explain to them what I was doing in that restaurant last night? My name is Beatrice, and I am hiding something from my friends because I'm terribly ashamed of my rich father and his millions of dollars. Once upon a time, we had an ordinary poor family. Mom worked as a cashier in a supermarket, and my father was a salesman in a pet store. We lived in a rented house on the outskirts of town, and we were pretty happy with our lives. We had a roof over our heads, we were never hungry, so there was nothing to complain about. I never knew any other life, and neither did any of my classmates, so I felt quite comfortable. Our greatest treasure is you, Beatrice, my parents always told me, and I think that's how it was, up to a certain point. One day, a lonely old lady moved to our neighborhood. You'd think there was nothing special about it. She moved. What's the big deal? Absolutely nothing surprising or strange. Everyone can live where they want. But there was one but. This lady, Mrs. Reed, was very different from the rest of the neighborhood. She was very, very rich. Well, at least compared to us. Crazy old lady decided to experience a ride called Poverty in Slums. My friends joked about Mrs. Reed's relocation. Among other things, the woman herself seemed to be quite eccentric, quiet, withdrawn, heavy-eyed. She could sit for hours on a bench by the pond and stare away, often watching the children play in the playground and wiping away her tears. She also spent a lot of money on charity. But with all that, you couldn't call her a nice old lady. "Get out of my house, you little slackers!" she would shout sternly to the teenagers as they approached her house to get a glimpse of the jewels, which, according to the rumors, did not fit in the cupboards and were scattered all over the house. But the strangest and most incomprehensible thing about all this was my dad's behavior. I don't want to confuse you, to add suspense to the story. One day, I was walking with friends through the streets of our neighborhood. As we passed Mrs. Reed's house, we noticed a strange man coming out of the door. He showed with all his appearance that he was afraid of being recognized. He hid his face under his hood and hurried away. "Well, I wonder who it is. Maybe a secret admirer or a volunteer who's helping the poor old lady?" said one of my friends ironically. But it was me who was the most surprised, though I tried my best not to show it. The thing was, I recognized the mystery man as my dad. Absolutely, I could not be mistaken. The sneakers gave the mystery man away. Only my dad had those. I tried to repair them with my own hands because we didn't have money for new ones yet. Besides, his walk, his jacket, 100% it was my father. But what could my dad possibly want in this lonely, mysterious lady's house? The idea that after work he, instead of relaxing in front of the TV, would go help this old lady was totally absurd. I felt uncomfortable and wanted to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. "Mom, I have to tell you something. It's very important." I decided to talk to my mother that night, and my trembling voice really scared her. "Oh my God, are you in love for the first time? Or did you fail a test again?" Mom took a break from the stove for a minute. I didn't know where to start, so I decided to just tell her what I saw this afternoon. Unfortunately, Mom didn't believe me and said it was either a mistake or a coincidence. But nevertheless, she was wary and soon became convinced herself that I wasn't making it up. "Honey, I'm going for a run. I'll be back in a couple of hours," Dad shouted one Sunday morning. My dad? Jogging? These are completely incompatible things. And who runs around in pants and shoes? That's when Mama sensed something was wrong and went straight to Mrs. Reed's house to discreetly observe what was going on. An hour later, Mama came home upset and said, "You were right. Daddy had something to do with that poor old woman. I just saw him go into her house." We were both very confused. We didn't understand what was going on. Why was Dad hiding his interactions with Mrs. Reed from us? But one thing was clear. If he was trying so hard to hide something from us, there was something wrong with the story. However, the worst was yet to come the next day. The news spread through the town with incredible speed. Mrs. Reed had passed away in her home. I understand age and all that, but it turns out that the last person to see her alive was my father. It made my mother and me feel uncomfortable, and my father was walking around the house, gloomy and confused, which frightened us even more. Finally, my mother mustered up the courage to ask my father a direct question. "Darling, did you have anything to do with that old woman?" It was as if my father was ready to be confronted one day, so he blurted out, "Nothing. I never had any contact with her. Don't create problems where there aren't any." What happened next was totally confusing. Suddenly, Daddy said he bought a penthouse downtown and we could move in there tomorrow. What? A penthouse? Downtown? Not long ago, this man was wearing ragged, worn-out sneakers and worked in a pet store. And now he's talking about a penthouse? Maybe the store where he works had a goldfish that grants all wishes? Although, as it turns out, at the same time he bought the penthouse, Daddy quit his once beloved job. "Where did you get that kind of money? Tell me the truth. Your family has the right to know everything," Mom said worriedly, but it only pissed my father off. "What difference does it make? Isn't this what you've wanted all your life?" he answered irritably. That's when it occurred to me and my mother that the only logical explanation for all this was that Dad must have gained the poor old lady's trust in order to get her inheritance. And I hate to even say it out loud, but maybe he had something to do with her death. I mean, we know what some people are capable of doing anything for money. Was my dad one of them? As much as my mother was worried about money coming out of nowhere, all her worries vanished as soon as she stepped through the door of our new penthouse. Only to me, the dirty money remained an embarrassment and a real burden. But I had no choice but to follow my parents. However, I was in no hurry to share the news with my friends. I didn't want my family to be gossiped about. "Beatrice, where did you move to? Will you invite us to visit?" my friends asked me. But I only replied that our new house was in even worse shape than the old one, and that my parents were totally against guests. "Anyway, let's hang out at one of your houses." I had to hide not only our new apartment, but my whole new life. Expensive clothes and shoes, fancy gadgets, jewelry, vacations. It was very difficult to keep it all a secret, but I couldn't flaunt this questionable wealth that my father had acquired. I couldn't. Yes, I used it. For example, when we went out for a walk together, or to a cafe, or to visit my parents' rich new friends. But I felt disgusted to live this life, because unlike my mother, I do not betray my principles. This went on for about a year, and every day I felt like I was walking on the edge, because at any moment I could slip up on something small and then it would all come out. I was scared, and I didn't want that to happen. I cared about my old friends from poor families, my school on the edge of town, and my classmates. But everything happened so suddenly. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I ended up on the Instagram feed of a high-end restaurant. I could not go there wearing cheap clothes, so in the photo I was wearing a chic designer dress. For a while I tried to get out of it, not answering my friends' direct questions, making jokes, being rude. But then I gave in and guiltily said, "I'm sorry. I'm just ashamed of this dirty money," and ran home in tears. I felt awful and disgusted. I hated our new house, my parents, and their money. Dirty papers. I hate it all. And you are monsters, I yelled at my parents. I closed myself in my room and covered my head with a blanket so I couldn't see all this disgusting luxury, which came at the price of the poor old woman's life. A few hours later, Dad came into the room, and he said he had something to tell me. "Mrs. Reed was my biological mother," he said sadly and guiltily. "What? Mother? What about Grandma Susie, who passed away 3 years ago?" I refused to believe Daddy's words, and then he decided to tell me his whole life story. Mrs. Reed had decided from a young age to devote her life to theater, and, it must be said, it was her true calling. So when she found out she was pregnant right after graduation, she decided to give up her child in favor of her career. In addition, she managed to find a woman who could not have children, but always dreamed of having them. That woman was Susie, a janitor at that very university. Mrs. Reed managed to build a good career, and she even got married before, but she didn't have any more children. When she got older, she decided to find her son, who she abandoned many years ago. She hesitated for a long time to get in touch with my father, but having learned about her illness and that she had very little time left, the old lady decided to find and visit him. "Hi, Michael. I am your mother," she said in a trembling voice during their first meeting. Dad could not believe what was happening because he was always sure that Grandma Susie was his mother. But Mrs. Reed had irrefutable evidence, documents. She moved to our neighborhood and started building a relationship with my dad. And shortly before her death, Mrs. Reed wrote a will in which she stated that she wants to give all her property to her only son. That's how my dad became rich. This money is not dirty, Beatrice. I was hiding the truth from you because I was afraid to hurt you. I felt very sorry for Dad. I'm sorry you had to lose your mom again, I replied and wiped away my tears. Now I had to get used to the idea that wealth that fell on our family is not dirty at all, and that it rightfully belongs to my father. A few days later, I returned to school where I proudly shared my dad's story. Friends listened to me with interest and said they would also like to have such a grandma. Would you like to suddenly inherit a huge fortune? Share your answers in the comments. And like this video if you enjoyed it.